In 2049, the rapid advancement of medical research and its auxiliary studies culminated in the perfection of genetic manipulation. The result would be the eventual stasis technology for space travel, groundbreaking medicines that resulted in the cure of diseases such as cancer, and the manipulation of human DNA. Gene babies soon became the forefront of conspiracies and societal unrest. Popularized by the media as a medical Cold War, the eugenics age would far exceed selective breeding. Therefore, in the same year of 2049, a worldwide ban was placed on unapproved genetic modification. This ban would give way to the Eugenics War. With this precious study set back decades in advancement, the eventual Cayne Corporation would dedicate its resources for research in the field in the orbit of Neptune. Its gruesome experiments would result in chaos and catastrophe. Hello there, and welcome to a Stasis lore video, where we explore the depths of the Groomlake. In 2050, just a year after the controversial eugenics ban, Henry Cayne, born of a small family, established Cayne Mining Limited. Cayne Mining would quickly acquisition mining rights in the East Asia Pacific. Additionally, it would also be granted access to the Yubari mine in Hokkaido, Japan. Using the more advanced robotics, the company would be able to access deep mining deposits, minerals buried so deep in the earth that no previous entity had been able to acquire them. In a short time, Cayne Mining came to an abundance of wealth. During its deep mining operations, Cayne Mining Limited would eventually unearth a Japanese facility thought to have been destroyed in the now past Eugenics War. While eugenics experimentation was still banned worldwide, Cayne would utilize the vast knowledge of medical research and documentation to expand from mining into pharmaceutical and academic research. Henry Cayne's endeavors would prove to be fruitful as the corporation evolved into a megacorporation, which was rebranded as Cayne Corporation in June 2090. Cayne Corporation would become the most powerful commercial entity humanity had ever seen. Even after the death of Henry Cayne at the age of 121 and the ascension of his son, Clark Cayne, the company would continue to expand. While mining still would be a contributing factor to Cayne Corporation's financial success, it would be its life-saving miracle drugs that would propel it into history. While the eugenics age saw an end to gene manipulation technology, Cayne's researchers would address other issues such as curing cancer, as well as fatal diseases. Organ transplants would be some of the most sought-after healthcare offerings. Many civilians would seek employment with Cayne Corporation to replace damaged organs and extend their lifespan. As deadly bacteria and pathogens were nearly eradicated, the average human now lives beyond today's senior years. Although praised for their world-changing research, Cayne Corporation isn't without scrutiny. The company is well known for their secretive weapon research, ever-expanding frontiers in the pursuit of greater profits. Such secrecy comes with strict disciplinary systems for its employees, as these secrets could jeopardize the corporation's public perception. Corporate espionage is not unheard of, as the PDAs throughout Stasis discuss multiple individuals selling company secrets to unknown agents. It is believed that one of these unknown agents is a rival corporation, seeking to dethrone Cayne Corporation as the leading commercial entity. Some of this espionage is simply files regarding currently banned eugenics medical research. To keep the public unaware of its unethical operations, the corporation would revive one of its derelict mining vessels to serve as a self-sustaining deep space research vessel. It would become known as the Groomlake, brought back to life after 15 years of being decommissioned. This commercial mining spacecraft turned research titan would be the final resting place for nearly all of its crew members that pledged to serve. As a state-of-the-art research vessel, the Groomlake houses hundreds of crew members. Stationed in the orbit of Neptune, it is isolated. As a self-sustaining vessel, it isn't often a disruption in communications would result in Cayne Corporation investigating ship operations. However, it does send undercover operatives to combat suspicions of corporate espionage and sabotage. A short passage says this about the Groomlake. Launched in 2100, the tower of the Groomlake was 6,106 feet long. The massive nuclear fusion-powered ship was used extensively as a planetary mining platform. 15 years of atmospheric exposure resulted in a weakened hull and her decommissioning. The Groomlake has multiple levels that have to be operated and maintained. Each level is accessible via elevator or tram system that covers the length of the ship. As an alternative, older pods are used that likely travel along the magnetized track. The Groomlake contains many facilities on different levels, such as product storage, service lobbies, research lab, crew quarters, medical station, laboratories that include botany and power lab, the tram stations, maintenance areas, recreation locations, engineering, and other sewage or side locations. Life aboard the Groomlake and how its many operations function can be found in the scattered PDAs throughout Stasis. It is a tale of ordinary to extraordinary individuals attempting to live together in a solidarity. Many believe in the research and ethos of Cayne Corporation, as it is heralded as a savior for those misfortunate or sickly. Typically, newcomers that arrive are often lower-level assistants, trading positions with employees that have decided to depart, or those who have been departed. To further explain, the operations of the Groomlake are often dangerous. Clumsy workers or miscommunication tend to result in the worst. Additionally, workers tend to volunteer to research projects, which result in many employees simply disappearing. In the chronological order of events according to PDAs, at the discovery of the eugenics research by the then Cayne Mining Limited, resources were poured into exploiting the vast, although banned, knowledge. While much would be achieved and presented to the public, there was much more potential for Cayne to weaponize this research, produce the ultimate weapons. Its experiments would have to be kept secret, away from the public. The main program of the Groomlake was known as Project C, headed by Dr. Milan. Project C was an attempt to utilize eugenic research to reawaken dormant genes inside humans. It is believed reviving some of these genes would allow Cayne to construct the perfect soldiers for sale. Experimentation would prove to be costly. While many officers were unaware of the true nature of the Groomlake's research, many accepted such experiments were being conducted. Exposure to the experiments for lower-leveled crew members consisted of those stationed around product storage. Product storage received its products from Cayne Corporation directly. The products, in this case, were humans unknowingly kidnapped on their travels throughout the solar system. Space travel was a time investment, even in the spacefaring technological age. Therefore, humans were placed into stasis pods in order to be preserved during their travels. It also allowed ships to operate with far less resources since individuals were sustained by their pods. While in these pods, civilians were completely vulnerable, unaware of how much time or events had passed. Taking advantage of this situation, Cayne Corporation frequently kidnapped victims to send to their research facility. It's unknown if these vessels were attacked, bargained with, or were a ruse to deliver victims directly to the Groomlake. One thing is certain, these victims came in abundance enough that they were housed in 3 storage units, complete with surgical facilities. While Project Seed utilizes many of these facilities for itself, the Groomlake's secondary program, Project Kitchen Knife, also draws from these human resources. A PDA on product storage says this: tomorrow, I actually get to do some work that doesn't involve monitoring vital signs. We're opening a pod with Dr. Isaacs and Project Kitchen Knife. They said they need a new specimen who is fully awake. These pods are filled with prisoners and drifters. They had their chance at a productive life and ruined it all. Yesterday was much harder than I'd imagined. When we opened the pod, the woman inside had no idea where she was. I'm aware that long-term stasis can cause disorientation, but she kept screaming for her husband, saying they were on their way to a holiday on Europa. The doctor quickly sedated her and gave her a vocal cord numbing agent to stop the screaming. I mean, she was obviously lying about being a holiday maker. These drifters will say anything to get out of this situation. I had to delete the last few logs. I read them over again, but they were just too painful. I can still hear the crying of the last man we thawed out. He didn't even scream. He sat on the bed crying until the doctors came in. They tagged him and took him down to the lab. He didn't even scream. Yesterday, we opened up a pod with a 10-year-old boy in it. There must have been some sort of mistake. Even if he was a drifter, he's a child. His name is Neil. He's in rehabilitation downstairs. I asked to go and visit him, but was told it would be easier for me if I just let things be. Many employees like Clara Daniels had similar sentiments. They believed Groomlake's experiments were honorable and its experiments justified, until the time came where horrible truths began to appear. While some simply transferred to other duty stations within the corporations, some, such as Clara Daniels, decided to take matters into their own hands, but often such actions resulted in their deaths. Many PDAs scattered throughout the ship ramble, and it would take time to put them into chronological order for you. So, to keep track, I'll summarize. At the beginning of the year, roughly January to May, the Groomlake began experiencing periodic lockdowns. Crew members that logged the events state that the lockdowns typically happen anywhere from a few hours to a few days. It would be the PDAs on the experimental levels that state the mishaps. With experiments continuing in the restricted levels, it would be the cloning level that would prove to be the most difficult. On this floor, cloning vats would be distributed throughout the area. Controllers of the vats would be able to observe the maturing clones that often became nothing more than clumps of genetic matter. These humans, genetically altered, frequently developed into unrecognizable monstrosities. Crewmen working in the cloning vats were required to retrieve promising subjects when requested by project heads. As clones operated off little more than basic instinct, they fought and rebelled, resulting in injuries and death. Some PDAs report that a clone bit a hole in a co-worker's face, while others tossed a man into the vat where he was eaten alive. A PDA on the cloning vats says this: Project Seed insists the cloning vats are put to use immediately, despite the fact they're far from complete. The vats can certainly sustain the cloning process, but some safety precautions are lacking. Like the holding chambers for research clones have no power routed to them, so the electronic locks are useless. The walkways above the vats are still only temporary. O'Sullivan fell over the guardrail into the vat yesterday. Had it not been filled with sanitizing solutions, we would have lost him. Clones appear to operate entirely on instinct. One of the complete human clones in Vat Theta bit a chunk out of Miss Keene's ear during feeding time. The experiment sought to enhance the genes of the clones to create more perfect soldiers, but in reality, it was reawakening dormant animalistic genomes. Clones weren't just simply strong, but also incredibly powerful, capable of healing wounds, growing sensory organs, even collectively organizing with one another. It would be some of these clones that would lead to the first series of lockdowns. These lockdowns were largely mysterious to the crew, who were unaware of the extent of the research being conducted by the Groomlake. Though, the lockdowns would be only the beginning of the problems that plagued the crew as the year progressed. Roughly May to December is where the Groomlake's operations turn for the worse. Being a self-sustaining vessel, the Groomlake houses a hydroponics level to grow food and provide the ship with an adequate supply of oxygen. Without this, the crew would suffocate and starve. It would be here that the next catastrophe would begin. An unusual fungus began to spread throughout the ship. According to PDAs from maintenance, the fungus appeared to be harmless. Dr. Milan discarded it, but held maintenance crews from eliminating it entirely. Unknown to the crew, Dr. Milan was studying this new fungal strain. Amused with it, he found it to be unlike anything he'd seen before. This fungus held an intelligence, perhaps even self-awareness. It wouldn't be long before the crew began to see this fungus in different parts of the ship. Maintenance desired to torch the creature off the vessel, but continued to be held back by Dr. Milan. In competition with the fungus, the Groomlake had been exposed to a tampered batch of regen fluid. Regen fluid is used for regeneration tanks, which assists in cell growth. Tampering with this substance can result in behavioral conflicts with the crew, which occurred in September. It is believed this is the first attempt at Dr. Milan to experiment on the crew on a mass scale. A PDA by scientist Erica Boxer, working with regen fluid, says this: "Work-wise, the regeneration tanks are working beautifully, but the increased demand for them means we're running short of chemical dissociation reagents, and the cell growth regeneration fluid is pretty much spent. Speaking of the fluid, it's this new stuff Dr. Milan's unit has had us using. It's technically the same as the last stuff, but I'm sure the molecular composition is different. Apparently it's 4 times as effective. It seems kinda unpredictable actually. I've actually asked Dr. Harvey to request that we switch back to the old one, which he has done twice. Why are they ignoring us?" By September 18th, the behavior problems in the crew had reached a peak. Erica Boxer reports that a brawl had occurred in the mess hall, and the men were sweating, appearing to look like they were overdosing. The rate of violent spikes had skyrocketed. Before her death, Erica sent her findings to a professor on Earth, to which he replied. What would be discovered is that the faulty patch of regeneration fluid had been tampered with. As a result, it gave birth to a mutated fungus, the same fungus that had spread throughout the ship. What would prove to be most alarming is the integration of a genetically enhanced form of PCP into the regen fluid's construct, the same drug used for individuals known as remote viewers during the Eugenics War. By October, it had spread to nearly every corner of the ship, even the methane collection plant. The food supplies were ruined. It would take time for food off-world to reach the Groomlake. With this truth being known to the crew, unrest began. Fights began to break out between crew members, while hoarders stashed away remaining edible food to sustain themselves. It would take time to bring order back to the ship. With the threat of starvation near, alcohol began to be the new source of entertainment. Security officers charged with keeping the peace believed it would be a helping hand in calming crew members, though the sentiment wasn't shared between all of the officers. Even so, the spread of alcohol continued until emergency rations arrived via shuttlecraft. With the food supply solved, all would seem to return to normal, except things only went downhill from there. One of the stories began with the clone simply known as Samantha. Named after a crewman's mother-in-law, Samantha was little more than a tale when it first spawned in the vat. As the weeks and months passed, various crew PDAs state that the collection of cells began to exhibit intelligence, even growing an eye. It was questioned, are the clones evolving? And in fact, they were. Without warning, a collective group of animalistic clones with unchallengeable strength escaped. An explosion rocked the Groomlake, causing it to go into a high-level lockdown. As a result of the explosion, injuries and deaths were reported all across the ship. In the confusion, the crew were unaware of what had caused the havoc across the ship. Their goal was to gather who they were able and make it to the medical bay. In an immediate reaction, crew members banded together, tried to reconnect with their loved ones, or make an attempt to get the wounded to medical. It was deemed at this time that the medical facility was a safe place for healthy and injured alike to gather. However, only individuals without their personal data tags were allowed into the facility. Personal data tags are integrated into the spinal cords of the Groomlake's crew allowing for administrative personnel to track individuals throughout the ship. It also allows the artificial intelligence system to monitor health-related issues or grant security access to certain locations. With the clones evolving, they discovered that collecting these personal data tags allowed them to travel throughout the ship unrestricted. To accomplish this, they were required to de-skin members of the crew or rip their personal data tags directly from their incision areas. To protect the remainder of the ship, secure areas restricted movement to any individuals with personal data tags. Upon arrival to MedLab, weapon platforms instantly fired upon anyone still implanted with one of these tags. Unable to move from their isolated locations, the remainder of the crew either attempted to reach medical, ate one another, or simply starved to death. Alternatively, others were overtaken by the fungus that managed to find a way to integrate itself into human hosts. Could this fungus have also taken control of the clones? It's entirely unknown. In one instance, the fungus took over the mind of a geneticist, which it then forced her to watch as her child was being consumed, before slowly consuming her as well. These events set the stage for the protagonist in Stasis, where the player begins the game. While some are explained through dialogue, the majority of this information is explained through the scattered PDAs left behind by the crew, some who survived for some time before meeting their ultimate end. Roughly 3 months later, the Groomlake had been overrun with fungus and genetically enhanced monsters. The crew had nearly all been killed. Those spared were at the graces of Dr. Milan, who had gone insane with the belief his experiments would be the new species to inherit the solar system, that they would be the ones to build a new society. For 3 months in the upper atmosphere of Neptune, the Groomlake cruised undisturbed. As a self-sustaining deep space vessel, and due to the nature of the ship's operations, Cayne Corporation had infrequent contact with the crew. It was unaware of the events that had even occurred, leaving anyone remaining aboard doomed to their fate. The protagonist of Stasis, John Marichek, is awakened during this period. Originally destined for vacation with his wife and child, John, with his family, entered Stasis on their long voyage, only to awaken here on the Groomlake. With his vitals slipping, he makes his way to the product storage medical facility. Still in lockdown, the ship was still surprisingly functional, despite the damage to minor systems. PDAs and logs left behind by the crew allowed John to manipulate his environment, granting him access to additional floors. Along the way, he witnesses the many horrors, bodily remains scattered throughout the halls and bulkheads, remains that once were the crew. Surprisingly, a voice comes from one of the deceased, a man named Yuri, in contact with a woman, Tia Hensley, who turns out to be John's saving grace. Tia claims to be a botanist in hydroponics. Providing few answers, she directs him to the tram, which is inoperable. After fixing the electrical panel, John is able to travel freely. It is at this time Dr. Milan becomes aware of his presence and actively attempts to derail the tram. He succeeds, but John survives, crashing down into the chamber housing cloning vats. Clones, who have yet to develop or are unable to clear the chamber, remain, surrounding the corpse of an engineer who attempted to cross the vat. While making it nearly halfway, the man was devoured or beaten to death. Using a light pole and generator, John electrocutes the clones to death and continues on his journey. While some of the clones have survived after all this time, much of the facility lay dead, likely due to the explosion that caused many of the ship's systems to become damaged. Throughout the game, there were few instances where the crew purposely damaged the ship's systems, if at all. However, the many flaws of the Groomlake continued to allow John to travel with ease. It wouldn't be until his arrival to security that he comes face to face with the clone Samantha that had been held in storage with plans to be transferred to the labs. It would be a disobedient officer that held Samantha in containment. At first taking a liking to the creature, then beginning to witness it evolve, which frightened him. Where Samantha was once a tail, by the time John encountered it, the clone had evolved into a creature. It is at this moment one of the animalistic clones burst into the checkpoint, causing John to flee. From there, he would make his way to the crew quarters, where some of the more colorfully written PDAs highlight the social conflicts between the crew. They also highlight what the crew resorted to in the absence of aid. Some resorted to eating their co-workers, others plagued with depression, thought to be killed, and some accepted their fate, pleased with the life they had lived. The upper echelon of the command structure had their PDAs filled with visions of retirement, new organs, promotions, and believed in the mission of Cayne Corporation. Some were close to revealing the conspiracy that had been unfolding aboard the ship, all while others saw that it would be carried out. John would read many of these PDAs in disgust and sadness. At times, he even would become confrontational with Tia due to her lack of remorse for the victims. He even wondered why the methane plant of the ship was located directly below the crew quarters. Often, he questioned each and every decision of Cayne Corporation, unaware that this ship had been retrofitted. Many of the ship's systems were likely altered, while others possibly remained for the sake of functionality. Odd, but perhaps necessary evils. In the crew quarters, John would come across the recreational club of the crew, where many of them hid from the clones. It was discovered here that the first clues that the personal tags were being stolen by the clones, as the victims all had their skin removed. It's a realization that John, too, will have to have his personal tag implanted by Cayne Corporation, surgically removed. After the crew quarters, John would make it to the damaged medical bay. For the first time, he would meet another individual in Stasis. Opting to wake the man up, John hoped to give him an opportunity to survive, but without following the right procedures, awakening an individual from Stasis was highly fatal. In this case, the man awoke confused, only to die mere seconds later. Taking the blame, John pushed forward, led by the belief that his wife and child was still alive, information fed to him by Tia. Seeing little choice, John placed himself into a medical pod, where he operated the controls to surgically remove his personal tag from his spinal cord. It is a grim, dark scene that demonstrates his determination to reunite with his family. Eventually, John passes out from the pain. A clone wanders into the medical bay searching for food. As it feasts on the deceased patient on the floor, having its fill, it decided to leave without attempting to disrupt John, who still laid on the operating table. Thankfully, the pod continues operating on him, despite his immobilized state. He awakens alive hours later. Although still recovering, John makes his way to hydroponics, which is consumed with the fungus. Bizarre genetically enhanced insect swarms the area. As the growth has covered the central elevator, John is required to burn the vegetation in order to access the lift to the primary medical hub. This is where he meets his first living crew member face to face. Her name is Eleanor Wade. She begs for death with a chronicle of her life aboard the Groomlake on a PDA nearby. To summarize, roughly in January, Eleanor is an established member of the crew, although to her surroundings, people are cautious around her, as she claims to be a Christian, but also a geneticist, something even she finds to be a contradiction of her belief. It is a field she chose to enter after having given birth to a child with a severe genetic illness. It is the medicine of Cayne Corporation, a service provided to the public in the form of some eugenics research, that her daughter lives to this day. Throughout Stasis, it would seem the sentiment of the Eugenics War to everyone outside the upper echelon of scientists seems to be negatively viewed. Except this sentiment is mostly centered around the older individuals who were likely present during the warring period. Eleanor attempted to disregard their comments. She would make peace with them until months later. In September, Eleanor discovered Dr. Milan had been experimenting on children subjects. She also uncovered that the adults undergoing genetic manipulation were shipped to the Groomlake illegally. Feeling betrayed, she vowed to leave the ship and expose the operation. But by November, the chaos had already unleashed. The high-level lockdown prevented her from locating her daughter, now trapped in hydroponics. Eleanor remained. As a voice note in her PDA, she says this: I can see Chelsea inches from me, lifeless. I contemplated taking my own life as she died just before my eyes. When those creatures attacked, the crew sealed off parts of the ship and I was left trapped in hydroponics. That fungus got to me, and now it's inside, profaning my body. Its nerves wrapped around my cerebral cortex. I feel it move. I try to move my arms, but it won't let me. It's making me watch the fungus consume my baby girl. I must watch and pray for the end to come. So then it does not. As a promise to help, John gave Eleanor a flare he'd found. After pumping hydroponics full of oxygen, the stage was set for a large-scale explosion. Eleanor would be its ignition. She would get her wish, and John would be allowed access to Project Seed laboratory. In addition to Project Kitchen Knife, which used drifters, kidnap victims, clones, and children in genetic experimentation, Project Seed directly involved eugenics research, headed by Dr. Milan. The project required an abundance of volunteers, all being women. Throughout the ship, crew members mentioned volunteering co-workers, never returning from the experimental laboratories. It was unquestioned, yet suspicious. One woman volunteered, but had been rejected. Project Seed primarily accepted employees that had given birth previously without complications. Those who had not been pregnant, had miscarriages or abortions, were instantly rejected. The reason becomes apparent as John enters the first lab of deceased pregnant subjects. The lab belongs to that of Dr. Clifford Beckman. Clifford, a leading professional and psychopath, balances his lust and thirst for blood with his word, responsible for impregnating many of his own patients. He successfully produces the modified beings that roam around the ship, a mixture of clones and something else. In covering this bit of lore, it's difficult to determine which project contributed the most to the monsters that lurk about the ship. I believe they are primarily the clones, as it is the clones who were first mentioned to be the cause of the lockdown. Clifford Beckman calls his subjects the Chosen Ones, or Homo Navi. He believes the deceased Navi's genetic makeup has become a viral pathogen that has leaked and spread into the ship. This too potentially is an answer to the intelligent fungus that roams the ship, though I haven't been able to determine the truth regarding this matter. Beckman would be one of the few remaining crew members who would survive the initial onslaught of experimental beings. Having a mutual agreement with Dr. Milan, he is kept alive to continue his experiments. But eventually, he would begin to come to conflicting views with his leader. Dr. Milan believed that the beings they created would be the replacement of the human race. Clifford, however, refused to be replaced and sought to escape. Dr. Milan would discover this plot, stop him. With all of the subjects in the location of Clifford's PDA deceased, John continues exploring the laboratory, stumbling across birthing chambers of Project Seed. The lab was filled with artificial wounds of genetically altered human embryos. Women who had volunteered for the project were kept alive on life support, strapped to chairs, impregnated. Seeing the extent of Project Seed pushed John to a near breaking point. He comforted the victims before removing the power banks supplying their life support systems. He would then destroy the computer mainframe housing all the data of the experiment. It is then he discovers the PDA of a Cayne Corporation internal investigator. Cayne Corporation had become suspicious of the Groomlake operation. They believed that an employee had been conducting espionage operations, selling and profiting from company secrets. Upon arriving, the agent received all the aid imaginable from Dr. Milan. spending months pretending to be his secretary while conducting his operations, to realize he'd been played the entire time. The individual the agent thought was his rogue employee was actually a pawn of Dr. Milan. Dr. Milan had been allowing this member of his team to steal research and sell it to an unknown competitor, all to keep attention off his true plans to unleash his experiments on the crew in order to see his new vision of a new race come to life. All this would fail now due to John's interference. The destruction of the hydroponics bay resulted in the Groomlake having mere hours of life support remaining. The destruction of the lab and experimental data resulted in Project Seed being lost forever. Dr. Milan sought revenge. Capturing John by immobilizing him with a gas, Dr. Milan imprisoned him in a medical ward. On the other side of a one-way glass was John's daughter, playing in a luxury furnished bedroom. To punish John, Dr. Milan released one of his experiments, which ate his daughter alive. It would push John to a near breakdown, all while Tia attempted to help him collect himself. With his daughter dead, John's remaining option was to save his wife, who remained in stasis. Taking the lead, Tia, now hunted by Dr. Milan, moved to get to her first, all while John traversed the bowels of the ship to reach the same destination. In a short travel, he would arrive at the Groomlake Museum, which spoke of the history of the vessel and the history of Cayne Corporation. He would then catch up to Dr. Milan, who captured Tia just before his arrival. The depths of the doctor's insanity is made apparent when he claims himself to be a god when John challenges his morality. In a quick decision, John releases the platform beneath Dr. Milan's feet, shooting him into the atmosphere of Neptune. This decision would prove fatal, as the vacuum of the atmosphere caused John to be propelled from the balcony, landing on his head below. At this moment, he is near death. It is at this moment Tia walks over to John to reveal that his wife is here in stasis. It is also revealed there are only 2 stasis pods remaining on the shuttle. Tia never expected John to leave the Groomlake alive. In a plot to survive, Tia manipulated John into saving the previous research of the Groomlake, which was now stored in his wife's DNA. Tia's original team consisted of a woman, Ellen, Yuri, the man John retrieved the communication signal from, and Tia herself. Yuri's objective was to retrieve John's DNA, which contained part of the DNA sequence needed to complete the genetic code. In a last-ditch effort, John raised to his feet, tossing Tia his personal data tag. Having a personal data tag targeted, the automated defenses engaged, killing Tia, but also destroying the second stasis pod. Dying and stranded, John reprogrammed the shuttlecraft's autopilot, remaining behind. It's unknown where John sent the shuttlecraft. In an ending cutscene, his wife appears frail, already dead. Stasis is one of the darker science fiction titles we've covered on this channel, and didn't disappoint. The adventure and manipulation of John, with the horrors discovered through the Groomlake, was a thrill to play through. It appears a sequel, known as Cayne, was released in 2017, just 2 years after Stasis. Keep a lookout for coverage on this, likely located in this playlist. Thank you for watching. If you watched this far, please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a comment, and I'll see you next time.